topic of what I was going to speak about today is everybody gets excited about the BIM, and Austin hit on something very good that really resonates with what our approach to BIM is having really strong people that know how to lead this effort. There's a skill set to the models. There's a skill set to bringing things together. For example, this project here that is in the background is Hotel Eddystone, right downtown Detroit. It's an O'Brien construction project. And on this one, Collaborative was hired to lead the entire process and to draw for every trade, which is rare in the industry. But there were a lot of things that they brought to the table that were really progressive, that were intriguing to O'Brien. For one, it's the collaborative approach to working with the designers. I'm a very big advocate of getting BIM on board as soon as possible. From my days as a construction manager, as soon as we knew we possibly had a BIM project that the designers were working on, we were at the table asking to play a role in reviewing the models, to bring construction knowledge forward into design. As Austin talked about earlier too, there's a lot of expertise in the trade contractors in the construction arena that can really help evaluate design and bring their knowledge forward to really bring a cohesive design to the table, so that when things get handed over to the owner, it's really, really well thought out. But part of a good BIM effort is having a person that knows how to lead this. I've seen all things across the board as a consultant. We work coast to coast. We're in California, we're in Boston. We're all over the southern region of the United States right now. And there's a lot of things that we run into, a lot of different coordinators. And I'm seeing a trend where a lot of people right out of college have the skill set to play with the models. And so companies put them out there. And one of the challenges with that is there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of very smart people at the table for BIM that have to be brought together and led across the finish line to have a really complete coordinated project that is constructible. And a lot of times younger people will struggle with that because they haven't built their leadership skills yet. And so as much as they might know how to put a BIM model together, there's a whole component of a skilled leader that has to come to the table and lead these 20, 30-year-old pipe fitting veterans and these designers that have 20, 30 years of experience, that have a lot of knowledge, but how to pull from everybody to get a really good product at the end of the day. Honey, feel free to jump in there like we did during the dry run and ask me questions as we go. But this is a project where the 15-story renovation, and we went out here and we actually went and laser scanned the entire facility. And this project has, even though it's about 100,000 square feet, which isn't huge by a lot of standards for BIM projects that I've been on in my career, it brought a lot of unique challenges. It has a historical preservation component to it, which brought plenty of additional design challenges to it. For example, our team has spent about a month and a half just working on these air handlers, these two air handlers right here, and the generator and all the rooftop units. And there were a lot of things that, this is where relying on your experts that know construction come into play. A BIM modeler can draw anything under the sun and the software will let them. Problem is, a lot of what they draw can't be built. And so having somebody that knows how to model well, partner with somebody that knows how to build well, you can get really good products. So for example, this is actually probably our 4th version of these air handler units here. And a lot of it was because of limitations of materials, the right flanges, the right bend radiuses, the right clearances around flanges, around the valves. We also had to come into play with sight lines for historical purposes. So moving an air handler unit 2 feet north, not an option, because there's sight lines that have to be protected. So we built some crazy stuff in here to kind of watch for that stuff. We've talked about laser scanning a little bit. I'll zoom in here to the penthouse. It's a very little penthouse, but in here, I'm trying to go slow so I don't make people sick. I navigate models all day, every day. I get used to it, but people that are new to it kind of get turned around. You can kind of see here faintly in the little foreground here, there's actually some kind of crazy built up floor. For some odd reason, this floor, and this is what's nice about the BIM model, is we can overlap existing conditions with the planned conditions. And in fact, this wasn't the original design for the mechanical room. They had a bunch of stuff that was going to be out in the middle that was going to be troublesome to build around. And we actually, here, let me actually go back up so you guys can see this a little bit better with, so what's nice about models, you can slice them and move them all around. Let me move this guy up. just a touch. That's probably high enough. So here's our penthouse, and we scanned it, and you can see, once I stop moving here, you'll see it regenerate for a minute. You can see this little platform is sticking up. And originally, the design we were given had these pumps sitting right out here in the middle. These water heaters were sitting over here. So we had no access to 3/4 of the room because the design we were given was blocking a lot of the access. So you get the trade contractors together, and you guys can really evaluate proper layouts. We even brought up this whole constructability thing here where, see that platform there. We started putting our panels here and we realized, hey, that might not be possible if this isn't going away. And so through a lot of digging and some structural analysis, we realized they were going to cut this out. They were going to pour a flat slab so that we could put panels over here and gear and things like that. I'll jump down for a minute here to the basement because a lot of the mechanical is on the roof and the rest of it's in the basement. And so we have this big mechanical room. We have the electrical room over here. And the, let's see here, fire pump room is right here. And then we have the mechanical room right here. So this mechanical room, sadly, was redrawn 3 times. And you don't ever want that. But as we got into design, we realized there were a lot of code limitations that this red wall here had to be built in here because the fire pump had to be a separate room from the mechanical room. And the original design did not have that. So what looked like we had a decent amount of real estate turned into quite a congested room. We also had to redesign the gas line location. And part of it was they had a buck hoist sitting right here in the background. And they were trying to avoid, the gas line was supposed to come in off the alley. And they were trying to avoid that simply because they didn't want to take the buck hoist offline. But the problem we ran into was they wanted to bring the gas line in from this side of the building right here. And long story short, this is the pedestrian entrance. And there was no frontage anywhere to put this gas main assembly where the designers originally hoped it would go. So it just wouldn't work. So we had to put it in an alley. We had to study the alley to find out, could it be done? When would the buck hoist come down? So these are the things that you talk about. I mean, yeah, you could run a clash-free model and you could do some analysis, but if you don't have construction teams thinking forward about how you're going to build this, what are the challenges of when you build it, clash-free is only getting you out of the gate. It's the how do you build this thing that brings a lot of value to the construction management team. And one of the things that Austin hit on is analyzing how people flow through spaces and how they use it. And I'll tell you, even to this date, I'm not excited about the layout of this room. Because if you look here, there's your, let me back up a little bit. There's your entrance to the mechanical room right there. You've got a very tight space to get through right here to get back over here to the rest of the room. And it was just the nature of limitations of construction that we just couldn't put these guys with all their piping assemblies that you see here. We couldn't put it back here where it was originally designed because this is where all the pipes turn up to feed 14, 15 stories of a building. Another interesting component of buildings is this building had basically 2 through 11 were supposed to be typical, 12 and 13 are typical as well of each other. So you got basically like 2 penthouse floors. So when we got into this, we thought, hey, we basically coordinate the basement, we coordinate the first floor, we coordinate the second floor, and then we coordinate the 12th floor and we're done. Maybe the penthouse, so maybe 4 areas. Well, the building shifts, and that's what people don't always think about is how things cross through a building. For example, electrical crossed through the ceiling of 3, so we had to pause at 3 and look at those challenges there. Some of the water lines fell off at the ceiling of 6, which caused some problems there. And then we also had some shafts that transitioned between 6 and 7. The locations changed. And so we had some very challenging, actually the big one was on the ceiling of 11. And it posed a lot of challenges that nobody really thought about. And
so, Art, did you do this model as a consultant to the owner or the architect or the contractor?
We were hired directly by the construction manager, and we were hired directly by them, and the trades were assigned to work with us, which is uncommon. That was just O'Brien wanted one finger to point at us to solve it, and so we were a little nervous about that, but we felt confident in our team, so we took on that risk, thinking we could bring a lot.
On the same job? No.
Sorry. No, this is Connor.
Okay.
Connor's on this job.
Okay, so my question is, from your experience, what would be the best scenario? Would it be to have this done from the owner side, from the contractor side?
I've got a mixed reply to that. A lot of trades are becoming so skilled that BIM is the way they work. Like, for example, as Aaron was saying, they just do BIM because they do it. When that happens and you get enough of those contractors on the job, BIM will just naturally happen on the job because it's so valuable to them, to the way they work. I find owners, as Austin and I have talked several times, and Austin and I have known each other for several years, some owners are for it, some are not. Some will view it as an expense. A lot of good construction managers that I worked with that have really robust in-house BIM teams, like Austin was talking about, they just do it because it takes so many headaches out of their court to plan this before anything's built. So there's a lot of different approaches. I think a lot of good owners, like Austin has said already, they wouldn't do a project without it because of the value savings it brings. On this project, I was a little skeptical that it was going to go forward with BIM because it was a development job. But over the last couple of years, we've actually done a few more. When I first started doing BIM, development jobs always scratched BIM. It was just a cost they didn't want to incur. Over the last 2 years, I've done quite a few high rises. This is actually our third one that's over 10 stories in the last probably 6-8 months. And it's because developers are realizing we can head off a lot of problems early on and actually save them money instead of being an expense to them.
So as a consultant, do you think this is just for big projects, or can small projects utilize BIM as well?
For the longest time, we were seeing that if the project really wasn't over 10 million, people wouldn't consider it. But ironically, I've got home builders coming to me that build a lot of homes recently, and we just started drawing custom homes because there's so much value for them, which at first I shied away from it, but they insisted that they wanted to do it. So I think BIM is reaching into the world in so many different areas where it just makes sense. I mean, we've seen small projects where we just renovated a mechanical room. We've gone in, laser scanned it, and piped out the boilers and things like that, and then just stopped there. So it's kind of a lot of people are starting to analyze it to manage the risk of a job, no matter how big or small they are.
So I'm receiving some questions through private chat. I'm going through those. I know Shalom just sent a message to everyone to send it through chat. People have been sending it to me privately. Here's a question. They're saying if an industrial project is more complex toward mechanical stuff, let the mechanical guy do it. If it's architectural, let the architectural or the maybe the carpenter do the BIM part. Is that something that you would recommend as a consultant? Would you be interested to enter the project as like owner rep or contractor rep, or do you think it's wise to kind of leave that responsibility to the major subcontractor who's doing the most of the coordination and clash detections?
I would really push anybody that has a big stake in the game to manage here to push for BIM. So for example, I would definitely encourage the construction managers to push for BIM. And even, like you said, key trades. The logic that I have behind that is you're protecting, anytime you can protect your profitability and your productivity of your crews, BIM is in your best interest to do. Because anytime you can pre-plan something and head off challenges that would come up in the field. I mean, if we find a problem now, for example, on this project, if our team finds a problem, it really affects one trade for the most part. We fix it, problem solved. If it happens in the field, it starts to affect not just the trade that it was responsible for, but it also affects the other trades that have to rely on it. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but I think it's in every contractor's best interest.
Right. I guess one of the difficulties in this topic is the standardization, because there's no standard way of doing this thing, and people have been developing it as they go along. You mentioned something about a Penn State standard that you guys are using. and that's what you recommend to use?
Yeah, we always start off with a BIM execution plan if we're brought on early enough to get to the table before a lot of the rules are put in place for BIM on a project. So if we come in before the trades are on board, we will put an execution plan in place. The execution plan talks about the level of development of the model, who's going to be involved. I did this out in California recently for a huge client out there, and we talked about what components are in the building. Is there access floor? Is there high-end kitchen equipment, things like that? And once you start to realize where the risk points are of a project, then you can start to rate it so that you can get the appropriate parties to the table to do BIM. I'm seeing a push on more projects for even guys that do wall assemblies to do BIM because people want to know where the king studs, the headers are, things like that. Things that they constantly get run over in the field once the mechanicals lock in place. These guys are coming to the table and say, we want to protect our space too. And so I've always been a fan that if any company has self-performs, they should figure out BIM. Because once you self-perform something, if you can put in the model, you protect that space.